This conference will now be recorded.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. For last many days, I was trying to take a session on this approach of data science approach towards astrology. So I've been into the field of data science for quite some time, and what I have found that there is a bit of similarity between data science approach and astrology approach. So today I'm going to talk about this and how we can actually filter out or improve the technique through which we approach an horoscope or a kundli. So things are pretty similar when we talk about data science and when we talk about astrology. So both are mainly, if I can say, so it's all about collecting the data and then working on it. So we have a similar approach in astrology as well, where we collect the birth details and on basis of that we make a certain analysis. So I found certain similarities which I wanted to talk about, and I thought that because being in from the data science background, I think uh, it makes sense if I can put along all the analogies and all the similarities between the two. I thought of taking this session in English because I to wanted this session to reach out to maximum people as possible. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So, if most of you who have been into the field of data science, they might be knowing that we have a certain approach that we go through a certain kind of stages when we are working with the data. So, first of all, when we extract the data, after that we make some analysis of the raw data or the first-hand data that we get, make some treatment of the data, make some analysis that what are the insights that we can conclude from the data at the very first go or the very first glance. And on basis of that, we need to understand that there is a requirement and there is a purpose of that data. So for example, if say I'm working with a banking data and I need to know that whether the person will default or not. So I need to have certain variables which will be my predictor variable. Let's say the age of the person, the income of the person, the salary and income are both the same. So let's say marital status, number of dependents, and so on. So these are some of the determining factors, and also the default history. So if the person has a default history, that will also count while determining that whether the person will default in future or not. So these are the certain variables which will help me to determine. And also, what is the requirement? What is the thing that I need to determine? That needs to be there at first place, because unless and until my purpose is clear, just playing around with the data won't help. I can do it for my personal exploration. I can do it for my personal enrichment of knowledge. That is just for the sake of my understanding. But what I get out of it at the end of the day, I think that matters more. So there should be there should be a certain goal that we need to reach out towards the end of the all the exercise that we do when we work with the data. So that purpose should be there in the mind. And towards the end, depending upon the scenario, come up with a business model or come up with a solution that will help me to solve the situation or help me to have a better approach towards my problem. So coming to astrology, if I try to understand, so we have some similar approach here as well. I take the birth details from the native and then I start working around with it. I start playing with that. I first, what I do is, so at the very first go, I get a first glance of the birth chart. That these are the details that person has provided, and these are the things that I can make out. This is how I can connect the dots between all the planetary alignments and all the yoke that has formed. And on basis of that, what I have understood. So in data science approach, what we do is there are kind of different kind of variables that we get. It could be a categorical, it could be a numeric variable, it could be entirely a text variable which has a different way to process and certain other things. Similarly, in astrology, when I get the birth details, so From the birth details, I have derived many other components like D1 chart, Lagna chart, which is actually Navmansh, Dashmans, Dasha system, the current transit that the person is going through, and Ashtakvarg, let's say, then Shadbal. So these are the things that I have derived from the birth chart. Now, on basis of that, I will first try to make a initial understanding, or I will try to do an initial analysis, which will help me to have a you know first impression about the birth chart, a first clear cut impression which will help me to uh, approach have a better approach. So is it that I can understand what is there in the birth chart? uh, am I at ease with all the yogs that are forming, and does it making sense with what has happened to the native in recent times? Because both of them should concord. Both of them should go side by side. What birth chart is reflecting and what has actually happened in real life. So both should go side by side, and it is then becomes the task of a astrologer to make that verification, that whether it has happened or not, whether it seems correct, the birth details that has been provided, does it seems correct, or under the circumstances the best result I can make out of the birth chart, does it match with the actual scenario? So let's say in data science approach, what happens is when we get the data, it could be possible that we have got some data which is missing, which has no value, and we need to come up with a certain treatment method which will help us to determine what will be that missing value, or just an estimation how we can replace that missing value with some other value which makes sense, or which makes uh, which is fit under the circumstances. So similar thing I can do. For suppose if I have predicted that in past this thing should have happened and there is a mismatch in the timing, so what I can do, I can rectify the birth time and see that most of the events that has happened in the native's life concords with the timing that I am providing, or an astrologer is providing. So that is the way, if our data that has been provided to me regarding the birth details are not close to accurate, or not something which I feel uh, could have been uh, close to reality, I can make some rectification and suggest a better time of birth, or which could have been more probable considering the circumstances and the feedback that I have got from the native. So this is some similar exercise that we do in astrology as well. This is what I call birth time rectification, which you can see as per BTR. Initial analysis is also required. And now understand the issue. So why the native has approached you? What is he looking for? What he wants to understand? So these are some questions that he will ask you, and the same time you need to understand that what are the things that you should be looking for to answer that question. So some of the questions basically that I have, because I have been in this field of astrology for around 11 years, so most of the questions that I get is when I will get married, when I will get a job, when I will get a promotion. So it is all about when some event happening in the life, the occurrence of event, when it will happen. So when everything will settle down. So most of the people ask about that. But considering the horoscope and considering what all information we can get out of Kundli, when an event is happening is just uh, I should say only 5% of the entire utilization of astrology. Uh, Actually, it could be used for many other purposes, like um, how is the personality of the person, what are the areas that the person should be focusing on, rather than investing his time in all the areas, all the fields which where he's not suitable. So those things, uh, making a certain good predictions, or what is actually recommended for the native, and many other things. What I have seen, that people only stick to these questions, that when it is going to happen, when not. Uh, but the true potential of astrology is much more than most people have an idea about. So this was a similar kind of approach that we have in data science and astrology, which I personally recommend. So most of the astrologer, you won't find them following the same approach. They might have their different approach, but this is the most intuitive and logical approach which makes sense to me, and I recommend to any other aspiring astrologer. So now let me come up with a situation where I can explain you things in a more better way, um, more granular way, where you can uh, understand the analogy that I am trying to convey. So let's say I have a data uh, in which the data set it is provided that the age of the person. So mainly it is a banking data. It is mainly for a financial company which wants to finance its customer based on the past records of its database. They are trying to come up with a solution or a model which will help them to predict if a certain customer comes up with certain features or variable, what would be the probability that the person will default or not. So let's say if the financial company has lent money to a customer and the company wants a guarantee that how much I will be able to, if let's say if I lend that money, is there any probability of that customer defaulting or not defaulting? So that is quite required to mitigate all the risk of default. And this is where the practical use of data science comes into picture. So let's say uh, I have certain variables which will help me to understand the profile of the customer, which is age, income, marital status, number of dependents. Is there any default history or not? There could be more other variables like credit score of the person and so on. So these are just a list of examples that I have provided. The list could go on. I could have many other variables which will help me to determine. And the target that I need to understand that whether the person will default or not. So on the previous data, I have a label data which says that with certain age, certain income, certain marital status, certain number of dependents, and certain history of default, that person has defaulted or not. And on basis of that historical data, I need to predict on my future data. So this is where I need to build a model on my previous data, on my historical data, where I have all the information, well, all the labeling is done, where I have my target labeled as default or null default. And in the future data where I don't have my target labeled, I need to make a prediction. What is the probability that the person will default? So this is one of the most simple example of data science where we make a prediction or actually calculate the probability on the basis of the probability that we have got, we try to take a threshold of probability that above this threshold the person is not going to default, or actually it is going to default if the probability of default is higher. Below this threshold we are on a safer side. And that and the technique of deciding that threshold is many there are many techniques. So I'm not going to talk about that will again help actually for that I need to take another session. So in the interest of time I'm omitting that. So this is the circumstances that I have in data science. Let me draw a similar analogy in astrology and try to understand that whether the situation will be similar or not. So here we have certain predictors which will help me to understand or which will help me to predict something in life. So here certain predictors that I have is first of all the most important that I feel is Lagna chart. D1 chart is the most important feature that you should be understanding. And the for initial phase of analysis, when you get the birth details, should be around your B1 chart. After that, if you have any other features or if you see that other features will help me to enhance or improve the quality of prediction that I am providing, then go along with that. But first of all, I think 70 to 80% of the questions can be answered using D1 chart. And then I have certain other predictors which will help me to predict like D9 chart at a very granular level of the person's life. Divisional charts, other divisional chart will also help me to certain extent. Dasha is also a major determining factor. Transit will help me to understand the current phase the person is going through and what is there, what are his future prospects. Dasha and transit both go side by side and both need to be checked, but I give more priority to Dasha compared to transit. Coordinates of planet also make sense. It also is a very good predictor for me because coordinates help me to understand that what is going to happen in under certain dasha, what is actually expected, and also the natural significance of the planet. So this will also help me to determine that. So let's say I've always said that moon is very important when it comes to astrology, at least in Vedic astrology, in Indian astrology. And position of moon actually helps you to understand that how what will be the nature of the person, how the person will react, and what will be its temperament. Most of the things you can make out of from the position of moon, and rest of the things which you when you align it with moon, then all other answers come along. So that is one thing. Moon comes first for me, and then rest of the things. And based on this, we need to predict that what event will occur after so and so time. Let's say after 2 years, what is my future prospect that I need to predict? After 5 years down the line, what is expected? 10 years down the line, what is expected? So these are my predictors on basis of which I will make a prediction. And what I will predict, that occurrence of event or not, is it something good expected or something bad is going to happen? Now, weight assigning is very important in astrology. The reason being, uh, let's say for the data science case study that I have just provided, or the example that just I have provided in the banking data, I won't give equal weightage to all my predictors. Certain predictors will add more value to me, will be more important to me compared to certain predictors. So let's say I have these predictors, and I feel, and on the basis of evidence that I have got from the data from the initial exploration, I have what makes more sense after the data exploration is that income is more significant. It makes more contribution towards determining the probability of default or not. So more the income, lesser likely the chance of person defaulting. Other variables also add up. Age is also a determining factor. Marital status and number of dependent also makes sense. Default history is also, if a person is habituated to default regularly, then it is highly likely that he will default again. So these are the things, and I have not given equal weightage to all of them. Certain variables are more impactful, certain variables are less, and on basis of that, I need to assign weight. Same thing goes with astrology. I need to have a certain weighting uh, structure or a certain weighting parameter which will help me to understand that which technique or which tool or which actually variable along all the variables that we have talked about in astrology should be most used. So in my opinion, what I have seen that D1 is the most contributing factor. It is most significant. It helps you to determine 70 to 80% of the things in a person's life. Coordinates is again very important. Dasha, then transit, then divisional chart. So after all this, if you need any further analysis and if you think that there is something you're still missing and that cannot be answered using all the things that we have talked about, like D1 coordinate, Dasha, transit, then come to divisional charts. That is when divisional chart makes sense. Then Ashtak is mainly for transit, and for example, if a planet is moving through a certain house of certain strength and bal, then what will be the fall of that transit? So that is what Ashtakvarga talk about. Shadbal is mainly the bar chart or the strength of Shad means six and Bal means strength. So six types of strength taken all at a time, which forms my Shadbal. So here I have Shadbal, and Shadbal also is not such a great determining factor on what is going to happen. It at max can tell me that uh, if I want to understand that what is the personality of a native, then to some extent it will help me to understand that which component or among the all nine planet, which planet is more of you can say uh, prominent, more which planet is making more impact on the natives, uh, character, his a formation of his personality. So at max, I can conclude that. But apart from that, Shadwell doesn't make much of more than this. It doesn't make more sense. At least no, it doesn't contribute in what is going to happen. At max, I can predict or I can have a confirmation of how the personality look like. So
This conference will now be recorded.
So this was all about giving weights and coming up with proper weights. And the weights that I have provided is completely based on my experience in astrology. Different astrologer might suggest different weights, but yeah, this is completely according to my understanding and what I have felt that is most important among all the predictors. So let us come to next step of building the model. So building the model is also a very important phase. So on based on this, I will be able to determine what is going to happen. So here, just to explain you an analogy, I have picked one of the algorithms or machine learning techniques which is used to make a prediction. So this is called random forest. So let me give you just a brief introduction or a brief background about the random forest. So what happens in random forest, as the name suggests, so it is random and forest. So forest is formed only when lots of tree comes together. So a huge area which has lots of tree, then it will convert into a forest, and that forest is formed on a random choice. So So I predominantly work on R, and if you have not assigned any of the hyperparameters for number of trees, so default number of trees that is taken in R is 500. So by default, 500 trees will be found in random forest. So random forest is a tree-based approach. So what happens is 500 trees are formed, and each tree will give a result. So 500 trees will give 500 results, and then a voting will be done. Voting in the sense, let's say my first tree is suggesting that the person will default. Second tree is suggesting the person will default. Third tree is suggesting that person will not default. So here I have got default, default, non-default, and so on. So among all the 500, I will now make a vote, and how many votes for default and how many votes for default. On basis of that, my final model will suggest and recommend me that whether the person is going to default or not, the final output. So formed using combination of many trees, this is how random forest works. And then there is a voting of all the trees in the final. So this is a main structure which will help you to understand. So let's say I have fed all my variables into the random forest algorithm, and firstly making a classification, or it is trying to predict class A is going to happen. Secondary is predicting class B, and so on till tree number n. It is trying to predict, it is making a prediction of class B. and then majority of the votes is then counted and majority wins. So this is how random forest works. So I hope this makes sense how random forest works. So this is just a basic understanding or a high level surface level understanding of random forest. So let us try to see, do we have something similar in astrology? So we have many techniques here. So this random forest is mainly called a bagging and ensemble method, where lot of other trees contribute towards making a final model. So here in astrology, so most of the people who have been in astrology or who have been learning astrology for quite some time, they might be knowing that there are many paddhatis, many techniques through which we can make a prediction. So Bhrigu Chakra Paddhati is one of them. Parashar Paddhati is one of them. And then we have something like Nadi. So Nadi is mainly takes into consideration the Karakatva of planets, and on basis of that, it makes a prediction. KP, as I've talked about, it is mainly on coordinates. So coordinate system. So what I can do is, let's say I'm getting certain results from Bhrigu, I'm getting certain results from Parashar, I'm getting certain results from Nadi, and certain result from KP. I can make analysis on basis of all these four techniques, or even more than that. I can include palmistry as well. Palmistry is also another technique, and I can, just like random forest, which use final output of all the trees, I can use output of all of these and feed into my final. I can have a majority voting out of this and make a prediction. So let's say if something is going to happen in a person's life, it should reflect from all these techniques equally. So majority of them should be indicating towards that single event that should be happening. Because if I believe that these all techniques are correct and these all techniques make sense, then they all should be pointing towards the same event. Now it could happen that a certain system has a certain level of accuracy, certain system has a certain level of accuracy. So it could be entirely possible that a certain methodology is not giving me a better result, and certain method is giving me a better result. So KP, I've seen that most of the times it gives you accurate result in 70 to 80% of the time. But what the problem is with KP is it is more susceptible and prone to error because it relies more on your birth time. So if there is a slight change in your birth time, then the coordinates would change, and that would lead to a change in destiny and change in results and what you have predicted. So it is more susceptible to birth time. Whereas Nadi is free from that. It makes use of mainly the transit and the Jankalin uh, Grah combination yog, and on basis of that, it makes a surface level prediction, and then you have to deep down into the transit to make certain prediction. Palmistry again is one of the better techniques through which, and someone who has a better hold on palmistry can make astonishing predictions. So this is also one of the great techniques. And as I've said earlier, so based on this, based on all the learnings that you get from all the methods, you will start weighting each of the methods according to the accuracy that they provide. So let's say if you're after having 2 or 3 years of experience, you see that KP is providing you a better results, you will start giving more weightage to KP. If you see that palmistry is giving you better results, then you will start giving more weightage to palmistry. So this is how it works. So yeah. So random forest, there is no weightage provided, but to a particular tree. But yeah, then a boosting method is something that I think that works in that way. So I think random forest is bagging, and then we have a something called boosting. So I'm not getting into that. Uh, Let us proceed to some other slide. So this is one of the thing that I have come across, which you know, quite a thought-provoking. thing that I have experienced in data science. So we have something called time series. And in time series, we have exponential smoothing, and then we have something called ARIMA model. So ARIMA stands for autoregressive integrated moving average. So autoregressive is something, let's say, when my present depends upon my past. So here, if you see the equation, I have my yt, which is dependent upon some alpha, which is my intercept, and then yt minus 1 with some coefficient beta 1 1, beta 1 2, then time t2, and then it goes on. So my current is dependent on my past and what has happened on past. So this is something called autoregressive. So in layman's term, where my future or present is a function of my past, and that is something called my autoregressive. And most of you would be aware that this is how your law of karma works. So whatever is happening to you in the in the current moment is all dependent upon your past karmas, past deeds that you've done. Uh, and the most, the I would say the best analogy that I can bring at the moment, we have something similar in predicting through dasha system as well. Now, let's say in most of the case studies that I have done so far, there I have shown that the results that a planet provides is not entirely dependent on that planet. It also depends upon the nakshatra it is placed, the sublord it is placed. So those are also determining factors. So let's say I have Saturn, and Saturn is placed in the nakshatra of Venus. Then Saturn will also give the results of Venus. So this is how there is a link between one and another planet, and this dasha system also goes in a similar in a cyclical format. So one dasha points to. So let's say Rahu. If I have an entire dasha of Rahu, so Rahu dasha will not be completely dependent upon the results or the coordinates or the positioning of Rahu. It will also depend, or it will also leverage the coordinates and the placement of other dasha, because within the dasha we have antar dasha, within the antar dasha we have pratyantar dasha, so all are interlinked. So you can understand that these all 9 planets work as a family. So none of them is isolated and none of them separately. So when you go to an astrologer and he says that your Jupiter dasha is starting for so and so date, and this will be the best dasha of your life, everything will be going smooth. So just understand one thing, that 16 years of Jupiter Dasha also has many Antar Dasha and Pratyantar Dasha. So when all your 9 planets are good and well placed, then only that Jupiter Dasha will give its full effect. Not when only Jupiter is good. So this is one of the most, you know, spread misconception about how this Dasha system works, that only one planet is completely incorrect. So here, if you see that my present moment or the YT is dependent upon many other variables. Here also, the result of one planet is not just dependent upon itself, it is upon the placement of others. So they all are in a way interlinked. So so here I found many other analogies. So I don't know if I have used the best of the examples to explain and help you understand that how that system of Jyotish is built through constant model monitoring and model improvement, and on basis of that, finding the interlink between the all the planets, and then coming up with the most optimum or the most suitable model that will help me to predict. So tools and techniques are many that are used in astrology, but uh, again, as I said earlier, the weighting should be done. Most of the astrologer doesn't talk about what weighting should be provided, how much I should weight to a certain, a certain system or certain technique, and how much I should not. Which variable should be my best variable to make the prediction, and which variable should not be. So these are the things that that is a complete black box for a aspiring astrologer. And these things which I have observed, I have only learned from my experience. No one has come up to me to teach me this. No one taught me this. Only through constant observation and constant monitoring of all this techniques, I have come along with all the uh, information that I've provided today. So that is very important. That importance of experience comes into picture. The more you practice, the more you get your hands dirty with all the work, the more you have a better understanding about the system. So why do we get predictions wrong, and why does a astrologer gets a prediction wrong? So here I just want to say that so let's say I've used that random forest example to help you explain how that random forest works. Now let's say if I feeded that random forest model with all the junk variables which are of no use, will my model correctly predict? Or let's say if I have certain assumptions, or if I could have provided some better variables to my model, wouldn't have been possible that that same random forest would have provided me a better result. So mainly it's not problem with the tool that I'm using or the technique that I'm using, the algorithm that I'm using. It could be possible that my approach is incorrect. The way I'm approaching this technique, or what I should be ideally using under the circumstances, is not something or not appropriate. Let me give you an example. I was recently going through this example, and I hope it will help you to understand better. So let's say I have something like this. So this is just an example. Uh, so let's say in the x-axis I have time, and in y-axis I have the uh, acceleration of a vehicle. So what the data provided is that the pickup of a bike varies with time, or the acceleration or the mileage that has a variation, and the variation was something like this, and it goes steady, something like this. Now let's say if I try to fit a linear model here, and I try to fit a linear line here, will it work? It won't. I tried with many other models, but did not find anything or nothing suitable for this. So then I tried, will a polynomial work? Even a polynomial doesn't make much of a sense, because again it might result into overfitting. So then I thought of something like a decision tree structure. So let's say if I do it something like this, I trace a line something like this. So here what I have done is, for certain interval, let's say from this will be my value of x, no, value of y. For certain interval, this will be my y. For certain interval, this will be my y. And in this way, what I have done is, I have made a decision that for a certain range of x, this will be my y, and it will remain fixed. So, and if you see that if the variation is not very high and the slope is not very steep, and it remains stagnant for most of the cases, then this is something which I can closely relate with my actual scenario. I understand that it doesn't resemble very close, or it actually gets into very close to the actual output, but still the best I can predict is using this. So this is one of the thing that came into my mind, and I thought of using this technique to make the prediction, or actually trace the graph. So let's say if a new x comes in, I will be able to have a approximate value or a more or less a close value of y that I will be able to suggest and recommend. So this is how I have traced the data. So this might work. This has worked fine for me. I have also tested this, so it has been accurate for many of the cases. Might not be best of the solution, but yeah, until and unless I get a better solution, I can work with this. But at least a linear line, if I just trace a linear line, that is not going to help. That is absolutely not going to help, and it could be highly misleading. So better than a linear line, I have come up with a better approach of a decision tree working here. So this is one of the examples. So always remember that your approach is incorrect. The technique or the tool that you have at your disposal, or the methods and algorithm that you have at your disposal is not incorrect. Just need to apply the right thing at the right place. The most of the time why we get things wrong is we have applied what we felt is correct, not according to the circumstances, what was appropriate according to the circumstances. And this goes both for data science and for astrology as well. So this was my analysis, and this was my session on my thoughts on data science and data science approach towards astrology. Hope you all have enjoyed this session. So I was trying to make this session. I was planning to do this for quite some time, but today I thought of. So let us start with it. So, actually, I was trying to put in more contents and more number of things which will help you to understand better. But I thought that everything that I have at the moment will suffice. So thought of proceeding with that. So hope it makes sense. Hope I feel that before calling astrology a pseudoscience, you will think about it and you will try to understand that what is the background and what is the scenario. Because the the way this complex method has been developed, astrology, and it has been developed with a lot of research, a lot of analysis by our rishis. When you come across the name of Rishi Bhrigu or Parashar Rishi, those who have formulated or build these complex models of astrology, you should be thankful to them, because uh, even in today's world, even a sane person or any other person would actually tell you that astrology doesn't make sense. It is a redundant system, and it should be thrown into dustbin. But just think about it. How did this system manage to survive so many years, so many centuries, so many millenniums? So that is still a question. That there should be something authentic about this system that has helped it to survive for so long. So this was my thinking, and this is how I build an analogy between data science and astrology. So both of them, so everything is very logical and intuitive. So something which doesn't make sense, at max, what we can say that we don't have a particular or a correct model to explain those things, and or uh, or maybe there is something which is not there in our mind to answer these questions. But that doesn't mean that the system is redundant, uh, completely redundant. So yeah, this was my analysis. Hope you all have enjoyed this session. Hope it has made sense. Hope I was able to convey all my thoughts. So thanks everyone for joining in.